New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
J.D. Vance is here. He was raised in the Rust Belt city of Middletown, Ohio, and the Appalachian town of Jackson, Kentucky. After high school, he joined the Marines. He graduated from Yale Law School and went on to success in the financial community. His new book tells the story of his remarkable trajectory. It offers an examination of white working-class America. It is called Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis. David Brooks calls it essential reading for this moment in history. I'm pleased to have J.D. Vance at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you should have been here earlier, so I thank God we've got you here. Tell me what drove you to write this.
Yeah, so I started writing it when I was a third-year student at Yale Law School, and I was sort of troubled by this question of why there weren't more people like me at Yale Law School. So I was the only white working-class person that I knew, or at least was open about it, and it seemed to me not just that I was relatively low income relative to my peers, but that I had this sort of cultural outsider attitude that was very, very unique, that I was not just I was not just lower income, but I actually felt like a cultural outsider. That was the first time I'd ever felt like that in my life. And so I really started to wonder, what was it that made me different? And I decided to start writing to answer this question of why there weren't more kids like me, more kids who had lived a sort of charmed life.
Did you feel like that you were living in a world in which people looked down on you or something? Because you qualified to be where you were at every stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I never felt that people were looking down on me at Yale Law School. I thought maybe there was a general sense of disdain for the community that I came from. Maybe folks would call them rednecks, but I never felt that was personally directed at me.
And so you decided to write the book, as you said. You started to think about where you came from, and it's called A Memoir of a Family and Culture in Crisis. What culture is in crisis?
Well, I think the culture is white working-class Americans, specifically white working-class Americans with connections to Appalachia and the Rust Belt. So what I saw and what I started to research and realize is that a lot of the problems that existed in my family existed in the broader community at large in a very disproportionate way.
And what were those problems?
So increasing rates of family breakdown and divorce, increasing rates of opioid addiction, a certain pessimism and cynicism about the future that's very real, maybe what I might call a learned helplessness about people's future prospects.
And is it a feeling of being a victim?
Well, I think it's partially a failure of being a victim, though I don't think that it's an individual failing. I really think that it comes down to the communities and the neighborhoods that we're raised in and the attitudes we acquire.
You acquire them from the neighborhoods. So what is it you acquire from the neighborhoods?
Well, I think that one of the things you acquire is a sense that your choices don't necessarily matter. And so what's happened, obviously, is that the industrial economy has been very tough on these areas, and so I don't think we should elide that. But in combination with that really tough economic circumstances, people start to give up. They start to think that no matter what they do, they can't get ahead, and I think that's a pretty self-destructive attitude.
Here's what David Brooks wrote in a column June 28. Anybody who spends time in the working class parts of America, and one presumes Britain, notice the contagions of drug addiction and suicide and the feelings of anonymity, cynicism, pessimism, and resentment. Part of this pain arises from deindustrialization. Good jobs are hard to find, but hardship is not exactly new to these places. Life in, say, a coal valley was never a bouquet of roses. What's also been lost are the social institutions and cultural values that made it possible to have self-respect and hardship. To say, I may not have a lot of money, but people can count on me. I'm a good person. I'm loyal, tough, hardworking, resilient, and part of a good community. We all have a sense of what that working class honor code was, but if you want a refresher, read J.D. Vance's new book, Hillbilly Elegy. Vance's family is from Kentucky and Ohio, and his description of the culture he grew up in is essential reading for this moment in history. That's the point I want to come to.
Sure.
This moment in history. Do you think in this book we understand some of the feelings that are driving this presidential election?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, one of the things that's really driving attraction to Donald Trump is not any special quality of Donald Trump himself, but of the fact that folks feel very resentful at the media establishment, the political establishment, the financial establishment, and so forth. And so one of the things that I really started to recognize as a teenager is that folks are very cynical, pessimistic, and because of it, sort of alienated from the broader American community. That's one of the things I wrote about. I didn't quite expect it would take the form that it's taken, but I'm not surprised.
But tell me more about that. I mean, they feel alienated because what?
Well, so it's a combination of the fact that their communities themselves aren't going especially well, right? So we talk about the addiction crisis, family breakdown, and all these other social indicators that don't look very good. I think that breeds a certain frustration both at yourself and at people who you perceive don't really care about your problems. So you think that your life isn't going especially well, and your political elites, the people who should care, don't. Not only do they not care, there's a sense that they actually condescend, that they look down on people like you because of the way that you live your life.
Why didn't it affect you?
Well, I think it actually did affect me in a lot of ways. And if you look back in my life, if you start, say, when I was 14 years old, you would have said, based on my grades, based on the drugs that I was starting to get into, that I would not have had a very successful life. And so a big part of the story is a sort of exploration for what changed in that life.
What changed?
Well, the first thing is that I started to spend a lot more time. In fact, I started to live full time with my grandma, and my grandma was a very classic, hardworking, self-reliant woman who recognized that life was unfair, but made very sure that I didn't think that the deck was stacked against me, even as I recognized some of the structural inequalities.
How did she do that?
Well, one that she preached a very tough message, right? So I remember when I was a kid, she bought me a really nice graphing calculator for one of my advanced math classes. She didn't have a whole lot of money herself, but she said, look, if I can afford this calculator, then you're going to get out there and bust your butt and work hard in your math class. And that really had an impact on me, that this very poor woman was able to do this for me. That meant that I had to study and work harder at school. She preached a very tough message. She rode me. She made sure I did my homework. She made sure I took my studies seriously, and she also knew that the cultural around me had a sort of message that maybe my choices didn't matter, and she fought against that.
And you went from high school to the Marines?
That's right, yeah. So I joined the Marines right out of high school, and this was right after we invaded Iraq in 2003.
Did you do that out of patriotism or for other reasons?
Yeah, it's a combination. I was definitely a patriotic kid, like a lot of kids who grow up in my neighborhood, but it was also a sort of recognition that I wasn't ready for life after high school. So I remember puzzling through the financial aid forms after I had gotten into Ohio State, where I eventually went. I had no idea what to do, and I was sort of scared by it, and I thought the Marine Corps might give me 4 years to sort of shape up.
Did it?
Yeah, it definitely did. Yeah, the great thing about the Marine Corps is that they really force you to shape up. I like to describe it as a 4-year character education, because they teach you not just, how to iron a uniform, but they teach you about financial management. They teach you how to make your bed. They teach you a lot of the skill sets that you need to be a successful adult.
Part of the conventional wisdom about this, in terms of a commentary that leads people to be so excited about your book, is you're giving them a key to understanding. And everybody wants to, because it is a dramatic political component in the presidential election of 2016. And they're saying to people, where is the dialogue between politicians? Where is the dialogue between the establishment and the people we're talking about? Because it's everybody gets, when there's a comment like Hillary Clinton made about desperates, that offends people.
Sure.
And when Donald Trump says something that seems to have contempt for people, it offends them. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, how much dialogue is there really taking place? Been trying to, in a sense, listen and communicate, and not just use for political means.
Yeah, so I think there is a precious little dialogue between these two big cultural segments of America. So sort of middle America, flyover country, whatever you want to call it. Donald Trump has become their sort of representative, and they're very proud, even though they may not like him.
Got in trouble in Pennsylvania?
Exactly.
In the Camry in 2008?
Sure, for saying that folks cling to their guns and religion, right?
Yes.
Which I think was a well-intentioned comment, right? He mentioned that folks were struggling economically, and that was his explanation. But it was sort of layered with a certain amount of condescension. You don't, adults that you respect don't cling to things. You might have said it a much different way, and I don't think the comment would have had nearly the effect that it did if he'd said it in a much more compassionate way.
So how do we change this?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question. I mean, I continue to think that one of the big problems, one of the big sources of this cultural divide is the fact that people aren't spending a whole lot of time together. So, when my wife, who is of Indian descent, was born in San Diego, the first time that I brought her home, I was terrified that she would think my family was a bunch of dumb hillbillies and that my family think that she was this sort of out-of-touch elitist. And the truth is that they actually love each other, and that's obviously a small example. But, when people spend time to each other, there's contact theory that suggests that when people from different groups spend time with each other, they actually empathize with each other in a much greater extent. It's a consequence of the fact that we have too much geographic segregation between the elites and the rest of the country. At the end of the day, if you're a policymaker in Washington, D.C., you know very little about the people in Middletown, Ohio, not because you're a bad person, but because you don't actually spend much time with them.
One thing that resonates with the political community that Donald Trump says he is the leader of, the movement that he says he's the leader of, is an opposition to, quote, globalization, an opposition to trade. They see that as sort of friends of the establishment, which have restrained them by taking the manufacturing out of their small town and sending it overseas. And they're left there with the same life they had, with no income, and trying to figure out a way to live a good life.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And work isn't just about a wage, right? It's not just about income. It brings pride. It's about building something. It's belonging to a community of workers. I remember my grandpa, to the day that he died, would point out cars that had been made with steel from the steel mill that he had worked out and said, "We built that car." That pride has really started to disappear because the jobs have started to disappear, and that's a really, really underappreciated factor of what's going on.
Do the people you write about feel like they're victims?
I think in a lot of ways they do feel like they're victims. They feel that they've been victimized by the political class. They see the jobs going overseas, and they want to blame somebody, right? And oftentimes the only person that makes sense to point their finger at is their local representative or their local congressman or the president.
Now, you have said one of the great predictors of whether you'll be attracted to Donald Trump is whether you are pessimistic or optimistic about the future.
That's right.
If you're pessimistic about the future, you'll vote for Donald Trump.
That's right. One of the biggest drivers of Trump's support, and one of the things that's most predictive of his support, is that you express cynicism about the future and a belief that your kids...
That's what he gives voice to every time he makes a campaign stop.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about the way that he talks about...
your cynicism is appropriate.
Absolutely.
Because those people don't care.
Absolutely. You think about the slogan, "Make America Great Again." The implication is that America isn't great right now, and if you're very unhappy about your life, that's going to resonate.
Do you think this is a large number of people? Do you think this is enough people to elect Donald Trump?
No, I don't think it's a large enough people to elect Donald Trump. Obviously, the demographics of the country have changed a lot, and the white working class community is still a pretty significant part of the electorate, but it's not nearly enough to elect Donald Trump alone. So my fear is, I think Donald Trump is not the right candidate for this group of voters, but my fear...
Who would have been?
Well, I don't know that there was a single candidate who really appealed to these voters in a way that one, inspired them, and two, actually had a set of policies that would have been good for them, either on the Democratic side or on the Republican side. Part of the problem with this election is, in fact, that I think that the problems that are unique to some of these working class communities don't get a lot of attention, and maybe, hopefully the book will raise people's awareness a little bit.
And they feel strongly about patriotism, they feel strongly about national service, and they feel strongly about the American military.
Sure.
Because they have been the backbone of those people who've gone to war.
Yeah, absolutely. You think of the demographics of the U.S. military, it's more likely to be Republican, more likely to be working and middle class, not especially destitute, not especially wealthy, and in the South and Appalachia. That is Donald Trump's core group of supporters right there.
And what's the difference? I mean, politicians have often speculated about this. The inability to unite the white poor with a broad brush, and the African-American poor,
sure,
and even the Latino poor.
Sure.
We haven't had that, and it's because of race, cultural differences,
right,
and other things, because that's a powerful coalition. You saw with Bernie Sanders certainly reaching out to those people who thought, they wanted something different.
Sure.
And it had a special appeal to millennials.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if the problem is so much that it's actually really hard to unite these different groups into a coalition of voters.
Possible?
I think it's probably possible.
Coalition.
I think it's a winning coalition. I think it's possible, but I just don't think that many people have actually tried, right? I mean, if you think of the Republican Party rhetoric, it is almost designed to turn off black voters.
Yeah, in fact, and that's what happened in the South.
Exactly.
And politicians used race to prevent
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the counterfactual, right? I wish that we had tried to do something maybe a little bit differently, and then we might be sitting here right now saying, isn't it great that we have this fantastic American political party that's appealing to the concerns of both white and black poor? Unfortunately, we don't. We have a party that primarily is white working class and very little else these days, and we have a party that is the black poor, the Latino poor, and sort of the cosmopolitan middle and upper classes of all races.
Yeah, and the prevailing wisdom is they're bigger.
Prevailing wisdom is they're bigger, and if you look at the polls, that's probably true.
What do you think? What impact do you think this election is having on this country, other than a sense of disdain for the tenor of it?
I think that this election is really having a negative effect, especially on the white working class, right? Because I think a lot of these grievances are legitimate, but what it's doing is it's giving people an excuse to point the finger at someone else. It's point the finger at Mexican immigrants or Chinese trade or the Democratic elites or whatever else. And sometimes these villains are legitimate. I think it's totally fair to say that the policy elites of the Democratic Party haven't been totally concerned about the white working class. But at the same time, fundamentally what's going on and what Donald Trump has done is change the focus of the white working class from a sort of engaged and constructive politics to a politics of pointing the finger.
Yeah, someone on this program, Jeff Greenfield, said that Hillary Clinton, and you work with Bobby Kennedy, and you work with John Lindsay and others, and a Yale law graduate, by the way, I think. Yale.
Okay.
Said said that what Hillary Clinton should do now, he says she should go to these working class communities, and perhaps she is, but go to them and say, I may not get your vote, but I want you to know I'm listening, and I want you to know that if I win and even don't get your vote, I'm coming back.
Sure.
To give them some sense, to be able to believe that that somebody heading for Washington, if she is indeed heading for Washington, has taken enough time to try to hear what the problems are.
Sure. I think that would be an extraordinarily constructive addition to our politics, because at the end of the day, if people only focus on those who they think are going to vote for them, then we're going to have an increasingly polarized electorate, right?
Yes.
I think that there could be a natural constituency in the white working class for Hillary Clinton. Obviously, the white working class voted for Bill Clinton in overwhelming numbers. So it's not, to me, it's not so much an ideological opposition to either the Democratic or the Republican elites. It's a sense that people just don't care about those like you.
Exactly right. They don't care.
Exactly. And, that feeling, unfortunately, if you think about the political dialogue that we're already starting to have, both on the left and the right, there's a movement to sort of gloat over the fact that the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. And I've noticed this willingness from people who think a lot like I do that, look, we told you so. To all these white working class voters, we told you so. We told you that Trump was going to be a terrible candidate. We told you that you were an idiot if you voted for him. The problem is, if you take that attitude of sort of gloating over Trump's defeat, then you're playing into the very thing that gave rise to Trump in the first place, which is a feeling that the elites think that they're smarter than you and just think you're a bunch of idiots.
Mm-hmm. What impact have writing this book had on you? I mean, other than the fact that it made you think deeply about where you came from,
sure,
and what impact an understanding of your own community might make.
Yeah, well, it's for the first time exposed me to the wild world of internet trolls who criticize everything that you do.
They follow you everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's very interesting. The internet is, a den of vipers, as I like to say. No, I mean, I think the biggest impact that it's had on my life, obviously, is that it's sort of, it's sort of forced me to confront the fact that I sort of exist uneasily in the world of the elites, and I exist uneasily in the world of the non-elites back home. And I'll always feel most comfortable back in Middletown, Ohio. But I realize that as the media sort of asked me to be this spokesman for the white working class voter who's voting for Trump, right? But as somebody who doesn't like Trump myself, I understand where Trump's voters come from, but I also don't like Trump himself, and that's made me realize that maybe I'm not quite part of either world totally.
Hillbilly Elegy is a book, a memoir of family and culture in crisis. J.D. Vance has said, he has somehow in this year, by David Brooks and others, a lot others, have come to sort of be the person that they think, that readers think, and that people who write criticisms of books and talk to him and look to him as someone who really does understand, because that's where he came from, where I came from, and therefore listening to him. Hillbilly Elegy. Back in a moment. Stay with us.